pockets within the party and elsewhere that really do support the idea of having another woman lead the ticket to run for the presidency. Obviously, we saw it with the former Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, and now we'll see it again with Kamala Harris. And I'm saying that, understanding that she has his endorsement. Who knows how it all plays out, but that would be my prediction moving forward. And there's one more thing I think people will be talking about, Mike, next week. No matter what happens with the dollars today, it's really the long game here. Win or lose in November, the Democrats have to keep open the lines of communication and keep their hands on the pockets of the people who fund their mission. And that means give today, give often, and give well, be that Kamala Harris or someone else. Mike?
Kevin Court doing a brilliant job. Kevin, thanks very much.
You bet.
Now I'd like to go to my colleague who was our man on the convention floor during last week's Republican convention, Bill Hemmer, Fox News anchor. Bill, your reaction to this massive breaking news.
Hey, Mike, good afternoon to you on what was otherwise a beautiful Sunday afternoon here on the East Coast.
Yes.
Mike, I've been in touch with a prominent Democrat for the last 2 months, and just for some context at the moment, when the debate with Trump and Biden was announced, that was on the 15th of May. And I said to this individual, I said, how do you game this out right now? And he said essentially, if it doesn't go well, we've got time. And I just remember this conversation very well at the moment because I think it's relevant to the conversation now. Let me just turn this TV down here, Mike, and I'll give you a bit more context. So at that time, I said, well, what do you do then? You got to go to Kamala Harris, obviously. And this person suggested not necessarily. I said, why would that be? He said, what we could do is we could go to Chicago, which, by the way, starts 4 weeks from tomorrow. We could go to Chicago and have an open convention, and it would be more like the democratic process that our party would accept, and that's the way we would play it. But essentially, the debate in late June gives us some time. That was the quote. Now, over the past couple of weeks, this person has said that the White House has been stupid, that the spin has been dumb, and that down-ticket Democrats are in pain. We're talking to members of the House and the Senate, maybe some governors as well. And then this past Thursday, I was in touch with this individual, and he predicted that Biden would be out by Monday. And obviously that day came 24 hours earlier. And the quote was, he now knows he will lose. There is no political support and no money, which goes with the reporting that we've had throughout the last 24 hours. And I thought Shannon Bream had a terrific interview on Fox News Sunday today with one of the delegates from the Biden team, and she was very honest and upfront about the money drying up, and that's a problem. In politics, you got the money, you got the time, right? Well, Lyndon Baines Johnson dropped out in, I think the date he announced it was late March of 1968. I think it was March 28th. And he made his announcement. It was unexpected. It was a speech he was given from the Oval Office. And at the end of the address, he announced that he would not seek nor accept the nomination to be the next Democratic president. I think the context is very important for when Johnson made that decision, and that is this. The Vietnam War was raging. It was late January, early February when the Tet Offensive was launched in Hue, Vietnam, Hue. And there were dozens of Marines who were killed. And at the same time, those Marines killed likely several hundred NVA, North Vietnamese Army soldiers. And toward the end of February, I think that is the date, if memory serves, when Walter Cronkite went on CBS and essentially said the U.S. cannot win this war. And then a month later is when LBJ made his decision from the Oval Office. I don't know how Joe Biden does this. If he does it from Rehoboth or the Oval Office or East Room of the White House, we'll have to wait and see on that. I think for our viewers right now, they have to start getting used to some really politically technical terms, such as delegates and super delegates, pledge delegates, free agent, all this stuff is going to come into play in Chicago. Jeff Greenfield wrote a great piece in Politico over the weekend. and sort of outline the possibilities if Biden stays in or if Biden drops. And I encourage everybody to check that out. There are essentially 3,896 pledged delegates. But once Biden drops out, they become free agents. And that's where the drama happens in Chicago. In addition to that, there are 700 superdelegates, and these are, you know, the party leaders, senators and governors and state party chairs.
Right.
Based on all the reporting so far, they will not get a vote on, well, they will not be able to vote on the first round. They will have to hold their vote until the second. We'll see how this all plays out because a lot of stuff hasn't been determined. The Rules Committee will then determine how the convention is run. And again, as I mentioned, it's 4 weeks from tomorrow. And I heard you on with Chad a moment ago. And Chad and I were talking on Friday morning at the conclusion of the RNC in Milwaukee. And that's when Chad got wind of Sherrod Brown from Ohio as a possible VP pick on behalf of Kamala Harris. Now, why would that be if indeed that's the way it plays out? You know, Sherrod Brown, he's from Ohio. J.D. Vance is from Ohio. You're talking about these upper Midwest states. Listen, I don't think Ohio is contested. Trump has had that state twice now by 8 points in 2016, again in 2020. But Sherrod Brown would be one of these picks who could go into Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, where it seems as of today that's where the election will be determined. So stand by for more, Mike. It's all developing now, and I think we have to stand back and wait for Joe Biden's announcement. And when that happens, I do not know unless you've got more information than me right now.
Have not seen that yet, Bill. Bill Hemmer, thank you so much for your time and your analysis. Busy week ahead for you and Dana on America's Newsroom. Grateful for your time today.
Thank you, Mike. If I get more, I'll call you back.
Thank you. I want to put on the screen for our viewers what President Biden said about backing Vice President Harris as his replacement. He says, quote, "Today I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this." I should note that former President Trump, speaking to CNN, says he thinks Vice President Harris will be easier to defeat than President Biden. We'll see how it all plays out. Let's go back to my colleague Kevin Corke live in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Kevin, your reaction to the news of the past few minutes? It's been quickly evolving.
Yes, it has. And I just wanted to share, if I might, Mike, I just saw a post from former President Trump come up on Truth Social. I'll just read part of it. It says, "Crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve and never was." He goes on to say later in this particular post, and now look what he's done to our country. Millions of people coming across the border, blah, blah, blah. He says this: "We will remedy the damage he has done very quickly, make America great again." So you're getting a range of reaction. And obviously, we're also watching, my producer Sarah and I are looking to see what kind of reaction we get from international leaders to this latest decision by President Biden to not run for re-election. We talked at great length about what that might mean, not just for his remainder of his one term in office, but what it might mean for his party more broadly moving forward. And I can share, again, I've been following text back and forth just with some of Democratic operatives that I've known for many, many years. And the consensus, Mike, seems to be this: Kamala Harris has every opportunity and every right to lead this party moving forward. After all, she is the vice president. But I will caution and say this: I've also heard that this idea of opening up the convention is good and healthy for the party. That's not to say she won't get the nomination. I think she will. But it is to say it's healthy to have the conversation to crystallize not just what the party is today, but what it intends to be moving forward. And maybe a bit of girl power, if you'll pardon the expression, in the November election for the Democrats. Maybe it's an all-female, an all-woman ticket. That was also proposed to be by one of my colleagues here, who I used to work with many, many years ago, and she said that might be a way to really push this ticket over the finish line and over to victory, acknowledging, by the way, as she did that, and I'll just tell you what she said here. She says, it's a tough road. And I think that's a fair assessment because, as you and I both know, we've covered the vice president for quite some time. She doesn't necessarily hold terribly well, but that can all change with a very strong convention and maybe a little bit of a boost from some of the party leadership, Mike.
We will follow it every step of the way. Kevin Corke, many thanks. Now I'd like to bring in Fox anchor of the story and executive editor Martha McCallum, who did a brilliant job along with Brett Baer of our RNC convention coverage. Martha, your reaction to this earthquake in American politics?
Hi, Mike. Great to be with you. It is an earthquake indeed. And I think your thoughts go back to Lyndon Johnson pulling out of the race in March of 1968. It was earlier in the cycle, but an equally dramatic moment. And I think that when you look at this statement from former President Biden, it comes obviously with a heavy heart from the current president Joe Biden. And I thought it was interesting that it was on his personal stationery, not White House stationery. At that point, there was no question about staying president. I think that's going to be an issue in the days and weeks perhaps to come about whether or not he can continue in the office or whether, that issue just gets bypassed. But, you think about the stumbles that he's had. You think about from June 27th, that disastrous debate. And then I think I think there's an interesting convergence after this extraordinary week of RNC convention. And I think objective observers looked at it and said, look, they had a great week, a very strong week. Is it insurmountable? No. But as I said in our convention coverage, the reason that you're seeing this scramble go on the Democrat side is not that they're so overly concerned about Joe Biden. Certainly that's part of it. But it's that they want to win. They're looking for a win. And they know that they need to scramble in order to get one and put together a ticket that will energize. They want to have a huge convention, too, in a few weeks. And now is the test. Can they pull that off? Can they pull off that kind of energy and enthusiasm? And you think about the numbers of people who didn't want Biden or Trump, for that matter, at that point to be on the ticket. And now they have this opportunity. So I think the Trump side is going to look at all this very carefully and see, if there's a shift. But they have so much work to do in the meantime, Mike.
Martha, here in Washington, they like to play the blame game. And it occurs to me that while we're seeing some relieved Democratic statements about the president's decision, at some point, do you think Democrats may take a closer look at the Biden family, the Biden inner circle, saying, how could you let it get to this point?
I do. I do. I think that the circle got tighter and tighter in recent weeks. I also think that, you have to cast questions to the president himself in terms of judgment and his own honesty with himself. And there were a lot of reports in the past month and a half that it was a deteriorating situation. There was that Wall Street Journal piece that talked about how he was slipping in meetings. And I mean, it's a sad story, really. And it's a story I think that anyone who rises to power has to think about their exit, has to think about a gracious exit from the stage. And I think that moment has passed. I think there'll be a big effort to rehabilitate his legacy, and it will probably recover in time. But right now, it's in a bad place. And being a bridge to the future, which is what he said he wanted to be in the 2020 campaign, that was the moment when he could have turned it over at that time and said, could have put his faith in Kamala Harris then, even given how lousy her polling was, and it would have given her an earlier opportunity to build her reputation and to reconnect with the people of the country. So this is a scramble, and it's chaotic, truly. It's really chaotic at this point.
Martha, what about the authorized leaks to the media about Pelosi pressuring the president, saying, get Donilon on the phone, I want to talk to him about the poll numbers I'm seeing? Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, it came out pretty clearly that he was being very direct with the president. Now you've got Schumer saying, quote, Joe Biden has not only been a great president and a great legislative leader, but he's a truly amazing human being. His decision, of course, was not easy, but he once again put his country, his party, and our future first. It seems to me, Martha, that Pelosi and Schumer are also worried about the balance of power as it relates to Capitol Hill.
Absolutely. And I think those leaks point to the fact that the president became very stubborn, became very dug in on this issue, because he said himself, he was asked in the Stephanopoulos interview, well, what if Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer specifically came to you and said it's time to go? He leaned in and whispered, it's not going to happen. Well, it did. It did happen. And I don't think either one of them wanted to push that out into the public forum, but I think it got to a point where they felt they had to. I think there's so many storylines here, Mike, as you well know, and it's been great watching you break this news for us this afternoon. But, there's so many layers to this in terms of why he didn't get out sooner, in terms of whether or not this orchestration could have been handled better. But now they literally are, and also I thought in the initial statement it was fuzzy about whether or not he was endorsing Kamala Harris.
Right.
And so that's also a weird moment. It was not a full-throated endorsement of her in that initial statement. So there's a lot to uncover here, a lot to uncover.
She is the executive editor and the anchor of The Story. Also did a brilliant job on our convention coverage. Martha McCallum, grateful for your time today. Thanks so much.
Great to be with you. We'll see you later tonight. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, Martha. Okay, let's pivot and go to Mar-a-Lago, where my colleague Dana Marie McNichol is live with reaction from the Trump camp. Dana Marie, take it away.
Well, good afternoon, Mike. We know he landed here in Mar-a-Lago last night. We saw a motorcade go towards his house around 10:55 this morning. So we're not only monitoring his responses here on the ground in Florida, but as you mentioned on Truth Social. So I do want to read you what he posted about 15 minutes ago. He says, crooked Joe Biden was not fit to run for president and is certainly not fit to serve, and he never was. He only attained the position of president by lies, fake news, not leaving his basement. All those around him, including his doctor and the media, knew that he wasn't capable of being president. And now look at what he's done to our country, with millions of people coming across our border totally unchecked and unvetted, many from prisons, mental institutions, and record numbers of terrorists. We will suffer greatly because of his presidency, but we will remedy the damage he has done very quickly. Make America great again. In all caps, of course, this rhetoric we've heard over and over again from him. Now, taking a look at Twitter, his son, Donald Trump Jr., he did tweet about 15 minutes ago as well, commenting about Kamala Harris, saying that she owns the entire left-wing policy record of Joe Biden, and that the only difference is that she is even more liberal and less competent than Joe. So, of course, Donald Trump, our former president, his son, we're monitoring his team. We're in communication, hoping to get a little bit more information there. But again, here on the ground in Mar-a-Lago, we know former President Donald Trump, at least from the motorcade that passed us at 10:55 this morning, that he's here in Florida. We're going to be looking around to see if anyone, the public comes here. This is where they gathered just after the assassination attempt, with flags in prayer. This area outside of Mar-a-Lago seems to be somewhat of a unity area for the party, especially for those here in Florida. Of course, in Palm Beach, West Palm Beach, many classify this as Trump country. So we do expect to see some people, and of course, we'll get their reactions. And you can come to us from there when any information we have. But yeah, monitoring it on social media and on the ground. Mike.
We'll go back to you for breaking news. Dana Marie McNichol live in Palm Beach. Thanks very much. Now let's go to my colleague, Fox News Sunday anchor Shannon Bream, who had a great show earlier today. You should be seeing her show right now, but we had massive breaking news. Shannon, your reaction.
Yeah, Mike, we talked about this morning on Fox News Sunday with a Biden delegate who's also a huge fundraiser for the national campaign. And she said, listen, I got to just tell you the truth. We've got people who write 6- and 7-figure checks, and they've all stopped. And she said that's just the reality of it, is that these people are very successful in their own right, and many of them are businessmen and women, and they only want to bet on something that they know is going to move forward. And they really had come to the conclusion they didn't think President Biden was going to be able to do that. And having covered many White Houses and presidential campaigns, you can't do it without a whole lot of money. And she said the reality was all kinds of fundraisers had been taken off the calendar, and the people were backing away. And it was really tough. She also was very full-throated in that she thinks the party will make a huge mistake if they try to skip over Vice President Harris, as we now know, and you've been reporting, who has President Biden's endorsement. And she just said, based on this party and the stories that we've told and the people we've tried to appeal to and the voter coalitions we've put together, that skipping over her would send a very dangerous message to those coalitions. And she's a delegate, and she said, I'm just cautioning it against it. And she does think that if the vice president if people coalesce behind her, the money will come. She was on the call Friday with a number of major donors and the vice president, and it was her sense that they would coalesce and the money would start flowing again if it is the vice president.
Shannon, President Biden's been in American politics for more than half of a century, and yet basically when it looked like he could lose, some people he'd worked with for decades began bailing on him, including former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. Obviously, they are concerned about the balance of power and trying to make sure it's not a bloodbath on Capitol Hill, right?
I think you're so right. And I think that's got to be really painful for him because remember, after the debate in that first interview he did with ABC, he said, listen, these congressional leaders, when I have private conversations with them, they're telling me to stay on. Because remember, Stephanopoulos pushed him. What if they came to you? Because when those big names start doing that, and we know what was starting to happen privately, we know that former Speaker Pelosi spoke to him in recent days and expressed real worry that it was going to be a serious problem down ballot. We had Congressman Jake Auchincloss, Democrat, on with us on Fox News Sunday this morning, too. And he admitted, hey, if the election were today, he said, I think we would lose. They were very worried about what would happen with any chance to flip the House. And they're certainly worried about losing the Senate as well. So I think all of those top leaders and, conversations that maybe President Obama was working behind the scenes, all of those things I'm sure were very hurtful to the Bidens. But based on recent polling, which is another thing he said, if I'm shown polling that says I can't win, that could be persuasive to me. The CBS polling out this week showing him down 5 points nationally to President Trump, down 3 points in those swing states. I think that must have started to break through. But I would note in that polling as well that Vice President Harris, while she was still trailing President Trump, it was a closer margin. She was actually within the margin of error when it came to facing up head-to-head with President Trump.
Well, and Shannon, we've got President Trump's new running mate, J.D. Vance, calling for President Biden to step down now. Expect to hear more of that from Republicans this week and in the weeks ahead?
Yeah, I think you will, because there have been a number of conversations about, listen, if this man is not fit to carry out the ticket, if you're simply worried about him winning or losing and that's your primary focus, that's one thing. But if you're saying he's not able, then you have to have the conversation about whether he can do another 6 months as commander-in-chief with foreign policy hotspots on fire around the world, with major challenges here at home as well. If your confidence in him is crumbled enough that you're willing to say to primary and caucus voters by the millions, we don't respect your choice, we're going to press him out and do something new, do you also owe to the American people some consideration of whether he is capable of doing another 6 months?
It was also striking to me that those interviews with George Stephanopoulos, Lester Holt, and others were designed to kind of steady the ship after a disastrous debate performance. But then when you had the president struggling to remember his defense secretary's name, that didn't seem to calm anybody's nerves.
Yeah, and think about this, Mike. Like I said, you and I have covered many campaigns over the years and conventions and all kinds of things. But this debate, how it came together so quickly and so early, you got to think that President Biden at some point may second guess whether that was a smart move. Because while we've all covered and had concerns and questions about his health, his acuity, how he's doing, listen, voters have told us that in polls they had real concerns across the political spectrum about him. Had he not had such a rough debate in June, he wouldn't have then been out doing this media circuit, doing these other things that really put pressure on him. It was such an early move, and yet it just barely gives Democrats enough time to say, we can pressure him out, and now we can either have a mini primary, we can endorse the vice president, we can move forward. But because of that early debate performance he proposed, it now seems it's led to enough pressure to push him out the door.
Well, and Shannon, of course, the president is recovering in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware from COVID-19. And I talked to several prominent Democrats who just said the guy can't catch a break, COVID on top of it all.
Yeah, exactly right. And listen, we're glad that it sounds like his doctor says that he's improving. He's been on Paxlovid, but it really took him out of the race and out of the conversation at a time he needed to be out there, whether it was on the campaign trail, he had to cancel and reschedule some things he was going to do in Texas and other places that would have given him a chance to continue making his argument. I've got the strength physically and mentally to continue on. It's always bad timing for anyone to get COVID, but certainly in the middle of trying to save his political career, to have him sidelined at the beach and again, appearing weak and frail as he was leaving Las Vegas right after the diagnosis, it just put him in a bad place optically. And it seemed like he finally realized there was no way to keep fighting forward for his own candidacy.
Fox News Sunday anchor Shannon Bream, who knows where we'll be next Sunday in American politics, but we know you'll be all over it. Shannon, thanks very much.
Thank you, Mike.
Let's go back to my colleague Kevin Cork up the road in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, covering the president being there for the weekend. And Kevin, it sounds like the president was determined to stay in and then had a change of heart earlier today.
Yeah, change of heart or the old political shove. Clearly, he did not want to get out of this race, Mike, but sometimes the choice is not yours, even when you're the president, if the party feels as if your candidacy guarantees them or makes it more likely that they'll lose the election in November. And it seems interesting when you consider, Mike, just a few hours ago, by the hour, you and I were talking about the growing number of Democrats who were suggesting the president ought get out of the race. And now that he has thrown his endorsement behind his vice president, Kamala Harris, we very likely over the next several hours will continue to see a growing list of Democrats throw their support behind her. Pramila Jayapal from Washington's 7th has already done that, and so we expect to hear a lot more of that in the hours ahead. But there's something else I should point out that will likely dominate the news for at least part of the early part of next week, and maybe even beyond, because as you heard our colleague Shannon mention, now things begin to turn just a bit. What might the Republicans do in response? And I don't mean with respect to the vice president. I mean with respect to the president himself. The speaker, Mike Johnson, already out with a statement saying, and I'm quoting now, if Joe Biden is not fit to run for president, he is not fit to serve as president. He must resign the office immediately. And so you have heard people talk about the whispers of the 25th Amendment. That will likely percolate even more in the days ahead. Now, what that means for the Democrats is, does that mean we move off immediately and maybe you elevate a Kamala Harris? Then it's president against former president in November, giving her the imprimatur of leadership. Or do you simply say, let's let the guy finish out his term and let's focus on the battle at hand, which of course is November. If you're a Republican on Capitol Hill, these are real serious questions they'll have to consider, Mike, in the hours ahead. Mike?
And of course, we're entering a massive week in American politics as it is when you've got the Secret Service director expected on Capitol Hill tomorrow, the FBI director on Wednesday talking about the attempted assassination against former President Trump.
Netanyahu.
And then Netanyahu coming to town to meet with President Biden and to address Congress. Your thoughts?
Yeah, crazy week, and really thankful that you're on the desk for us today. And I suspect you'll be quite busy, as will I, in the days ahead, Mike.
Okay, Kevin Cork up the road in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. Kevin, thank you so much. Now let's go to my colleague Alexis McAdams out in Battleground, Michigan, where former President Trump was yesterday, along with his running mate, J.D. Vance. Alexis, good afternoon.
Hey, Mike. Well, what a crazy news cycle here. I mean, the former president was nearly assassinated a week ago, and now he's reacting on his Truth Social to this breaking news. Yesterday here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, he stood on that stage for the first rally with his now VP pick, J.D. Vance, and they talked about, hey, how they didn't even know who the Democratic nominee was going to be, but stood confident that no matter who it is, whether it's Kamala Harris now or President Joe Biden, they were going to beat them. Someone to kind of look back at some of those moments that happened not too long ago here in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Trump saying this, I would, say we're going to find out shortly who the nominee is going to be. I don't know who it's going to be. Let's do a poll. Then he kind of looked to the crowd, Mike, and asked everybody, do you want me to run against Kamala Harris? Do you want me to run against Joe Biden? And people booed for both. But people in that line that wrapped around that arena not far behind me in Grand Rapids, Michigan, in this battleground state said they were confident no matter who he picked for his VP Trump and no matter who he runs against, they believe in certain areas in the Rust Belt, they're going to be able to turn those states red, including going to Virginia, where we know that J.D. Vance is going to be coming here in his rally on Monday. He's going to Ohio and Virginia. They're really going after those states to try and flip this area. We reached out to the Trump campaign asking for reaction at this time. They're still trying to get all that together. And as we reached out, as you saw, the former president took to his own social media site to kind of bash Joe Biden, saying not only was he incompetent, but that he was never able to run and should drop out. He shouldn't be running and continuing if he's not going to be the nominee. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. We're going to talk to some voters here, too, in this battleground state to see what they think. But I don't think many people that we've talked to on the ground in the campaign trail are going to be surprised that Biden dropped out when you heard all of those names kind of flowing in on a daily basis, very important names in the Democratic Party, and seeing some of those op-eds come out from some celebrities that have raised so much money for him. So people thought after that poor performance on the debate stage where it kind of put Joe Biden in the spotlight in a negative way that he was going to drop out any day. Mike.
Alexis, not surprising, we heard former President Trump last week tell our colleague Brett Baer that he was not going to refer to Joe Biden by name during his speech. He let it slip once or twice, but clearly the Trump campaign has been thinking about the potential of this happening and facing someone else, whether it be Vice President Harris or one of these governors.
That's right, yeah, and he didn't talk too much about Joe Biden, either did J.D. Vance. They mentioned him once or twice by name. As you said, maybe it was a slip, maybe it was on purpose, but he just talked about whoever was in the White House and how it wasn't going well and how they weren't looking out for the average American, and that's where this campaign is focused now, right? When you look at parts of Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and even parts of Virginia, which they're trying to flip, and even Minnesota, they want to talk to those people that feel like they've been left behind by the establishment in Washington, that don't feel like Joe Biden, when he was in office, really put their needs first when we come to inflation and we come to the border. So that's what they hammered home on that stage. But it was a different tone after the former president was nearly assassinated a week ago. He kind of kept more on that unity message and looking forward for what he can do for the American people. But definitely big breaking news. What a news cycle here. I mean, I think people, we were just at a local restaurant trying to take a moment before when we thought we had a break, and you could hear that news, people talking about that inside that restaurant saying, hey, did you hear that President Joe Biden is not running for re-election? And then one guy shrugged and said, not surprised. Did you see that debate? So that's what we're hearing on the ground in Michigan. Mike.
Alexis McAdams live in Battleground, Michigan, a critical state that will likely decide this election. Alexis, many thanks. To recap the breaking news this afternoon, President Joe Biden has decided that he will not continue on as the Democratic nominee for president, and opening up the possibility of his vice president, taking over as the Democratic nominee.
For a second.
This has been Fox News breaking coverage. My colleague John Roberts is going to be stepping in here momentarily to take over our breaking coverage as we look at the news of the hour. President Biden announcing he will not continue as the Democratic nominee, eventually giving his full-throated support to his Vice President Kamala Harris, asking donors to support her, to give her money. We know the money trail had dried up for the Biden campaign. Now he's asking them to support her, saying, quote, today I want to offer my full support and endorsement for Kamala to be the nominee of our party this year. Democrats, it's time to come together and beat Trump. Let's do this. So, huge earthquake in American politics. We've got a change at the top on the Democratic side. We've got a convention coming up in Chicago. It's not entirely clear how things will play out in the weeks ahead as we head towards Chicago, whether it will be an open convention or whether the party will coalesce around Vice President Harris. But it's been quite an afternoon in American politics. And my colleague John Roberts is standing by. John?
Well, I don't know, Mike, if they've got my microphone working or not. Can anybody tell me? Yes, apparently they do. What an afternoon.
Indeed.
I mean, we knew, we had some idea, Mike, that this was going to happen. There were reports out last week that he might decide to drop out as early as this weekend. I had thought that he might wait until he's over his COVID infection so that he could actually come out and make a public statement to say, look, I've done some soul searching here. I've looked at the numbers. I've talked to the campaign. I've consulted with my family, and the decision is that it's best for me to step down. I did not think that he would do it in a paper statement and then say, I'll be talking to you all about it in person later. So it's interesting, really, the way that all of this went down.
And Prime Minister Netanyahu's coming to town to meet with him. And so that also is like a complicating factor. He's got to be leader of the free world at a time when he's saying he's going to be stepping aside.
But in his statement, he said, I'm stepping aside to focus on the rest of my term. And a lot of people are saying, well, listen, if he's not strong enough of a candidate to stay in the race for president to get a second term, well, he should step down as president as well. But if you look at the last time this happened, in March of 1968 when Lyndon Johnson was told and finally realized, look, the path to re-election is obviously going to be fraught with a lot of peril. It's best that I step down and leave it to somebody else. He finished out the term.
Right.
Hubert Humphrey eventually became the nominee, lost narrowly in the popular vote to Richard Nixon, got blown away in the Electoral College. But Johnson stayed on through the rest of the term. Now, of course, the situation was a little bit different. Johnson was a younger man. He was in full possession of his faculties. It wasn't subject to some of the problems that Biden has been. But, you know, Biden's a lame duck president now. He's just got to sit out the next 6 months. Other people have been helping him run the country up until this point anyway. So I don't think there's going to be much argument in the overall about him staying with it until January 20th of next year. Because most presidents who are in his position just kind of, you know, cruise off into the sunset very slowly. But it will be interesting to see if Kamala Harris indeed becomes the nominee, what the process is going to be to get there, or if other people are going to suddenly throw their hat in the ring. Because who knew, you know, 2-3 months ago that Biden was actually going to step down? We were told by everybody and who you know wanted to come out in public on the Democratic side that he is the nominee. He's going to be staying with it. He's the best chance to beat Donald Trump. Now suddenly folks have decided that that's not going to happen. They're looking toward Kamala Harris as the next link in the chain here. But I think it's quite possible that other Democrats will come forward, Mike, and say, you know what, she's not the strongest candidate, because there was some internal polling that Politico covered from an outfit called Blue Labs. They found that Kamala Harris, by about 3 points, did better than Joe Biden. But people like Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, Gretchen Whitmer, the Michigan governor, Wes Moore, the governor from Maryland, Josh Shapiro, the governor from Pennsylvania, did far better against Trump than Kamala Harris did. So will there now come a discussion in the Democratic Party? Whoa, wait a minute, not so fast. Let's not be so quick to anoint Kamala Harris. Let's go through a process here where we consider all of our possibilities, permutations and combinations when it comes to a nominee and a running mate, and who would be the strongest team to go up against Trump.
Or do Democratic leaders look at it and say, she stops the bleeding, let's pour our resources into the Senate and House races to be a check on a future Trump presidency?
You mean give away the White House, knowing, put her in knowing that she likely would lose to Donald Trump and save the down ballot races? I mean, that's one potential. You know, Kevin Corke was talking as I was frantically racing to get in here, that, you know, Kamala Harris being sort of the presumed heir to Joe Biden might start the fundraising up again, because nobody else can take that money except that campaign at this point. Now, you might be able to figure out down the road how other folks, you know, whether it be a Gavin Newsom or whether it be a Gretchen Whitmer or whoever, how they can get their hands on that money. But at the moment, the only people who can use that money are Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So sort of putting her name, I don't want to say putting her name into nomination because we're not there yet, but Joe Biden saying I fully support her might get the dollars flowing again into the campaign, and then at some point in the future they figure out what to do with that money based on who does become the nominee.
And to that point, when the donors say we're not giving anymore, that ultimately can take down a campaign if you can't.
Oh yeah, once the money dries up, you're done. I mean, and we knew last week that it was time to stick a fork in Joe Biden when all of those donors said the money's drying up. That's the kiss of death. When you don't have any more money coming into your campaign, you've got to either completely reboot or you've got to step down and leave it to somebody else.
And then clearly those authorized leaks from Pelosi's camp and from Schumer's camp, making it clear they're putting pressure on the president to step aside. I'm sure that had to make him feel really uncomfortable and make his team furious, but the damage was done.
So you know where I think that the real push started happening? You know, there were a lot of whispers and things, but I think the real push happened the night of that big fundraiser in Hollywood put on by George Clooney. When Biden was standing there, very stiff and kind of like with a 1,000-yard stare in his eyes, and Barack Obama came up and grabbed him by the wrist and led him out like, come on, Grandpa, it's time to go back to the picnic, we're having cake, and put his hand on his shoulder first of all, but then on his waist and let him out. The way that I perceived that, I'm not saying this is what happened, but the way I perceived that was, this is Barack Obama saying, we need to have a change. It's time for a change. And then the whispering campaign began. David Axelrod, who's still very close with Obama, was out there leading the charge on this. And then George Clooney did the op-ed, which had been run past President Obama. And he didn't say, no, George, you can't send that out. It was like, okay, go ahead. And then when Adam Schiff came out, he was a proxy of Nancy Pelosi. And you knew that the writing was on the table right then and there.
Fascinating times in American politics. We thought it was going to be a boring campaign. A current president against a former president, but
can you imagine where we are in this campaign this week compared to where we were last week? I mean, we've